Hey, Chapel here, and today we're going to be talking about the rise of some old meta staples, Frostbat and Chaos Volley. Now for anyone who doesn't know the game during Legacy, the most common PvP builds at the time were Frost builds with Frostbat and Frost Barrier, and then Chaos builds with Chaos Volley and Bloodright. The game at the time was a lot slower paced, but these builds were very honest and high skill to play, and despite the lack of diversity, it was a pretty fun matchup on either side. Almost everyone you ran into was running these spells, but going into Gloomrot, they fell off completely, and have remained mediocre for the past couple years. Because Gloomrot introduced higher tiers of weapons, physical damage became a lot higher. These physical builds could play a mix of defensives or physical buffs, which were safer, faster, and were dealing more damage than these projectile spells. And the spellcaster builds that were played, the more honest projectiles were replaced by some of their power crept counterparts such as Crystal Lance and Void. Gloomrot was really bad for these spells, and it got a bit better in 1.0, with time to kill being a lot faster. These spells had higher poke and could somewhat keep up. However, there was still a gap between physical damage and spell damage, and most importantly, Rogue with its higher move speed had complete initiative of when fights happened, which once again left Scholar Blood a little bit behind, which was the only effective way to play these spells at the time. But with the new changes in Oakveil update, the stars have aligned to make these spells some of the best in the game once again. There are a good few reasons for this. Between mixed bloods and more spell power blood options with Draculin and Mutant, there are a lot more options that you can take, and there's a lot more ways to customize your stats. Whilst before physical builds would always be faster because of the access to Rogue Blood, spellcasters now have a very close equivalent with Draculin Blood, which lets you be fast whilst also having low cooldowns. With the way Draculin Blood functions, it actually especially helps out these spells. Most of Draculin's power comes from your spell crits being able to give you very fast spell cooldown rate, letting you keep high spell uptime. Now one option to do this is running 2 offensive spells to be able to proc crits as much as possible. However, doing this leaves you very vulnerable to being dove and no option when people are on top of you. Therefore, having consistent poke spells like Frostbat or Chaos Volley, which respectively have multiple charges or hit twice, are perfect for keeping your Draculin cooldown reduction active. On top of this, with the new passives introduced, Frost and Chaos especially have powerful passives. Frostbat gets Cold Soul and Chillweave. Chillweave most importantly gives it access to an incredibly strong bread and butter where you can freeze from Frost Barrier, Axie, and then Frostbat twice for big burst. Chaos's passives on the other hand has Renewing Flame and Chaos Kindling. These increase your damage to ignited targets by a lot, while also giving you constant healing. So far Frost has been the more popular of the two, but I think that Chaos Volley has a ton of potential that's currently being slept on. Frost deals its damage through its reliable combos whenever it gets them off, whereas Chaos is just reliable poke damage. The Frost combos are especially strong in 1v1s, but can be interfered during a team fight. Volley on the other hand can struggle a bit more in 1v1s versus double defensive setups where it can't AoE through. You may want to take Void instead for these encounters. But in team fights, Volley especially shines, being able to do huge damage at max range. Now both these builds are able to get a pretty good spread of really good damage, decent mobility, and still relatively tanky all things considered. Both of these builds can run almost identical setups, with the only difference being the 2 passives being either Frost or Chaos respectively. Frost is flexible in the builds it can play because of its hybrid damage combos, but a very standard setup is Draculin's Scholar 2, Dracula's Maleficer for the armor, Arch Warlock for the amulet, Elixir of the Twisted, Chaos Coating, and then for passives taking Bastion, Dark Enchantment, Turbulent Velocity, and then the 2 passives from the respective spell schools. I expect in the current state of the game for these to become common staples to have as a member of your squad, or to play in 1v1s. The main thing that was holding these spells back, of spells being weaker than physical, is no longer the case, and if anything, spell builds are looking stronger than physical right now, as they've benefited a lot from the new blood types, the Dark Enchantment passive which scales off spell power making spell builds tankier, and Coating, which also scales our spell power. It's also worth noting just how incredibly early these builds can power spike. With just a blue weapon that max rolled spell power and a max tier amulet, you already have the majority of the damage that you would be having in endgame, whereas physical builds need to get to an artifact weapon that has BIS stats before it reaches its full potential. Even then, it would ideally be wanting BIS stats on multiple weapons, when spell builds get most of their power spikes just as they're getting into late game. They come online much faster. Alright, that's all from me guys. I hope you enjoy these newly revived old school builds, and have a good day. I'll see ya.